In this lecture, we're going to look at 4 different arguments for substance dualism, and 2 of these arguments come from René Descartes from his book Meditations on First Philosophy, meditation number 6, or chapter number 6, and then 2 more arguments from Professor Richard Swinburne, recently retired from Oxford University. One thing that's interesting about this material is that it shows us that dualism is not purely a religious doctrine. So here's an old engraving of a soul of a woman being carried to heaven by an angel. Of course, the soul looks like a body. And of course, many, probably most religions teach that there is such thing as a soul, which can continue existing after the death of the body, even after the destruction of the body. The soul can still exist and either get resurrected or maybe live in a disembodied condition. Many religions teach that, not all, but probably most. And that's interesting. But you'll notice that there's nothing religious in any of these arguments. None of them have a religious premise that they depend on. And so there have been philosophers who have believed in dualism for philosophical reasons. Now, of course, if this is consistent with their religious views, that's all good, they would say. So just to review briefly, in Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, he started out by doubting everything that could possibly be doubted, and he decided that he can be sure of at least one thing, namely that I exist, that whenever you're thinking, it can only be true. And so it's the kind of thing that you couldn't possibly be mistaken about. In the chapters after chapters 1 and 2, in the middle chapters of his book, Descartes says that he can prove in a couple different ways that God exists, that is, a perfect being. And he also thinks that we can trust our faculties, our belief-forming faculties. So in his language, whatever I clearly and distinctly perceive is true. When something seems in a really strong way to us to be true, it couldn't be false. Now suppose that he has shown that we know all these things. I know that I exist, I know that God exists, I know that I can trust my intuitions. Still, there's a lot that we haven't, that we don't yet know, according to Descartes. And notice that none of this has to do, obviously, with any physical thing, whatever. So do we know that any physical thing exists? And in particular, what kind of thing is the I? What is this I that exists? Is it a soul? A non-physical reality? Is it a living organism which weighs 200 pounds and is 98 degrees right now? Or is it a combination of the two? So what Descartes now says that he used to think that he was a body, that he would look in the mirror and see himself there. But now he doubts that. And when actually he considers all the arguments, it turns out that he denies that he is a body. So when you look in the mirror, what you're seeing isn't, strictly speaking, you. It's something other than you, but to which you are closely related. Philosophers call this kind of view about human beings mind-body dualism. It's also known as substance dualism. And this is the doctrine that the cosmos contains at least 2 kinds of substances, and a substance here means an entity, that is an individual thing. There are minds, thinking things, and there are bodies, that is, extended things. And by the way, that's what body means in this context. It doesn't necessarily mean a human body. It means just an extended thing. And by extended, we mean extended in space. So bodies are things which are in space and which take up space. And they have shape and they can move. So a human body, your limbs, your torso, your head, a human body is a body. It is an extended thing, but a coffee cup is an extended thing, or a pen is an extended thing. A tree is an extended thing. So you could call a tree a body, a pen a body, a cup a body. Okay, that's what he means by body. And by thinking, by a thinking thing, he just means a thing which is conscious. So in other words, it's a conscious entity. By thinking, he doesn't mean necessarily reasoning or doing something that requires higher intellectual powers. A baby would be a thinking thing just because it has a first-person point of view. It's conscious. So this is the doctrine that there are minds that are things which have a point of view, conscious things, and then there are things which take up space. And it's the view that no body is a mind and no mind is a body. These two groups are mutually exclusive. There's nothing which is both a spatial thing, an extended thing, and a thinking thing. Now that's obviously controversial, and more philosophers than not deny this. So presumably a mind is a thing which can think, but if it's not extended in space, it seems like the mind is therefore going to be, it's not extended, the mind is going to be not physical. So if you accept mind-body dualism, you're denying naturalism. Remember, the worldview of naturalism implies physicalism, and this is a denial of physicalism. Not everything is physical. There are also thinking things. Here's a quote from Descartes where he says a little bit more about his concept of mind and body. He says, "By means of these sensations of pain, hunger, thirst, and so on, nature teaches that I am present in my body, not merely in the way that a sailor is present in a ship, but that I am most tightly joined and, so to speak, commingled with it, so much that I and the body constitute one single thing." So I'm so closely united to my body that me and my body can be thought of as one thing with two parts. A human being, that is, can be thought of as a thing with two parts, with a body and a soul as the parts. So here's Descartes' first argument for dualism. And to understand this, you have to understand what an essence is. An essence is all the essential properties of a thing. All of a thing's essential properties. That's what an essence is. And of course, that invites the question, what is an essential property of something? And an essential property is more or less a defining property and one which a thing can't exist without. So it's oftentimes thought that it's an essential property of you that you're a human being. Another property of you is that you have red hair or brown hair or whatever. Now your hair color property, that could change and you would still exist. But if it's really essential to you, if it's really an essential property that you're a human being, you couldn't exist and not be a human being. You couldn't exist and be an onion or a gorilla or a circle. Okay, so an essential property is a property that a thing can't exist without. So let's look at how this argument goes. For any x and y, if I can understand the essence of x without understanding the essence of y, then x and y are really distinct. That is, we're talking about two things and not one. Second, I understand the essence of myself. I am a thinking thing. Third, I understand the essence of my body. It is an extended thing, a thing which has spatial extension, a thing which takes up space. Conclusion, therefore, my body and I are really distinct, because I can understand the essence of one without understanding the essence of the other. So what should we make of this argument? One objection is pretty obvious, and to work up to it, consider this. If a feature is essential to you, that means you can't exist without it. So if it's essential to you that you are a thinking thing, that means there is no time at which you exist and you are not thinking. Is that true? So here's an objection to the argument, and specifically to premise 2, which says, I understand the essence of myself, I'm a thinking thing. If I'm essentially a thinking thing, then I'm always thinking, right? But what if, like this kid, I drank too much and passed out, and I'm not conscious at all? If I'm not conscious at all, if I'm completely blacked out, then I'm not thinking. Thinking just means being conscious here. And yet I still exist, right? So I think this is an important objection to the argument, and the argument will have to be unsound if this objection is right, and I think it is. Surely there are times when we're under anesthesia, or where we're passed out, or just in a certain stage of our sleep where we're not conscious. But maybe the dualist can reformulate, and maybe Descartes should change this to the essence of myself is that I'm able to think, or something like that. And so then even when passed out, maybe you still would have the ability to think, just you wouldn't be able to exercise that ability. So maybe there's a way around this. There's another very interesting objection to this by one of Descartes' contemporaries, but I'll tell you about that in the next segment.